What's up guys, this is Cher talking, welcome back to my channel. On today's video, I'll be making a full review for the Mysteries Exploration Romancing Festival Apollo banner. That brings Apollo as a full-time damage dealer with some very interesting gimmicks. Kenji, a BP battery but also defense booster, and Hiveris, a counter specialist for guns. Well, we're gonna start talking about Apollo. Apollo is a heavy nuker with a very high intelligence, 132%. We also have 101% agility. He doesn't really need speed, but it's good because it also increases accuracy. Endurance is 78, but Weave is 105%. Pretty safe versus ailments or debuffs. Well, this guy here has Taunt Stance on start of battle. That has large effect. It lasts for 5 turns. It's just once. He will draw more enemy attacks towards him because he gets damage blocked for 5 turns. He will not take damage, but he can still be inflicted with ailments. Though with such a high will, it's not that easy to happen if you are bringing ailment resistance or will buffs. Then after turn 5, you can see here at the end of or after turn 5, you grant yourself this Matchless Magic and also Power Elegance. This will only trigger once. But what is Matchless Magic? This is a passive where he'll be getting 25% intelligence buff on start of every turn, and also grant himself a defense boost that decreases damage taken by 30% for that turn only, but it triggers every turn. Okay, so he can stack intelligence buffs. That is if an enemy does not buff break you, but the defense boost is always welcome to decrease damage taken. But then he also gets Power and Elegance. Power and Elegance will double the effect of the second passive. What is it? When you are landing an attack, we'll always chase with Masamune Plus. But you also have a 50% chance to chase with Masamune Fury and 50% chance to chase with Conflagration Plus. Okay, but let's check these attacks here. The first one, Masamune Plus, it's Slash and Heat. The Power, just single target. Masamune Fury, that's the 50% chance one. It's double S Power, probably double the damage, Slash and Heat as well. The third one, Conflagration, 50% chance to trigger. It's a full AoE attack with heat damage and 8 power only. Okay, it's kind of mixed, but it's basically based on past versions of Apollo. They wanted to bring all of his signature moves, but Conflagration is not that helpful since Apollo is better for single target anyway. But okay, we have one guaranteed chase from turn 1 to 5, but on turn 6 and beyond, you have 2 guaranteed Masamune Plus chases, and then you have 2 chances of getting Masamune Fury on 50% each, 2 chances of getting Conflagration Plus at 50% each. At the best case scenario, you're gonna use your attack and then you can get as much as 6 chases. That's right, that's a lot of damage because Apollo self-buffs intelligence and there's much more to this guy. Okay, on the start of a turn, he also grants himself this weak heat up that increases damage versus weak targets by 50%, triggers a max of 4 times per battle for a total of 200% on turn 4 and beyond, right before he gets his extra damage. Besides, Apollo gets 1 extra BP every time that he lands an attack. So, on turn 1 to 5, you have at least 5 BP, meaning that you use it as Q and then you chase it. You can get up to 7 if you get both chance to chases. And then on turn 5 and beyond, you get at least 6 BP, but as max as 10. That's right, if you get all the chases. That's not so easy to happen, but if RNG is on your side, it can happen. Then we have weak maximum voltage that will give him a weak heat up that will increase damage potential only when landing a weak attack by 50%, can trigger 4 times per battle for a total of 200% damage increase from turn 4 and beyond. That's good because it's just 1 turn before he gets super strong. So Apollo wants to land weak attacks and he will be a very good choice for enemies weak to heat. Although he does have Slash, there's a lot of Slash competition, especially Kihachi, but Apollo works well by itself. Skill number 1 is called Flaming Wind. It's a single target slash and hit attack that before attacking buffs the user's intelligence by 25% and launches an attack with E-Power. It's pretty much so that you don't need to use a normal attack anytime. And buff intelligence, it's nice since he can buff intelligence further by turn 6 onwards. So, free stuff. The second skill is called Bonfire of Judgment. It's a full AoE, just heat attack that before attacking, if your intelligence was increased, Then you grant yourself a morale up very large that increases damage potential by 40% and an attack boost that increases damage potential by 30 for just that turn, and then launches an AoE attack. And after attacking, it will buff intelligence by 25% on max level. So what's the gimmick behind this? The game wants you to use the first skill to buff your intelligence so that you have your intelligence buffed and then you can use this skill. But if you are on turn 6 onwards, you will be buffing intelligence on the start of a turn, so it will always trigger. Unless, of course, the enemy removes your buffs on start of turn, and that always happens after you already self-buff it. But you can also use someone like Matriarch that has a fast buff to STR in intelligence, and she will be buffing Apollo so that he can already start with Bonfire of Judgment if you so want. Especially if you have extra BP generation, you'll never need to actually use Flaming Wind. Because when you get the morale up and the attack boost, this will also affect the damage of your chains attacks, and that's something that you want all the time. So, a free 70% damage increase on top of that 200 from maximum voltage. Pretty nice. Okay, and then we have the third one that's much better than the second, because this one, although costs 10 instead of 8, it's triple S power in single target, and it's also slash and heat. Has the same mechanic. If your intelligence was increased before the attack, you would then grant yourself a morale up and an attack boost, 40%, then 30% increase for just that turn, and then launches the attack. That will feel much more like a 4S power attack. And then after attacking, you will be buffing intelligence so that all of your chains will do much more damage. And like I said, starting from turn 6, your Maximum Plus will be double. You have double chance of Maximum Fury, double chance of Conflagration Plus. Damage is very, very, very high. It's kind of like having the overall power of Summer Leon, probably Summer Leon without the Anti-Material Shot Inheritance, but without having to care about number of turns. This guy is very strong by blocking damage and then becoming stronger after turn 5. Okay, I don't think there's anything that really helps Apollo, because he does have an interesting skill from the Halloween style, Quattro Pumpkin Shield, that enters an evasive stance, gives a hit up of 20% damage increase, and grants a super hit Malicious Pumpkin skill on rank 1 on Overdrive. That will be permanent, and you can get 4 chances of Malicious Pumpkins that can buff allies' will by 15%. So 4 chances can give you as much as 60% will buff on those scenarios. But the thing is, you are wasting your turn by using this. It's 10 DP, too costly, and you are not attacking. Apollo likes to keep attacking because he'll get extra BP when he's attacking. And in the perfect scenario, you have someone else giving him extra BP so that he never has to use Flaming Wind. But if you don't, you have to cycle between the third skill and the first. And nothing else will help much, unless you really, really need to buff Will, and you can use Malicious Pumpkins, but decrease the overall power of Apollo by so much that I really don't know why. So Apollo is a very strong and heavy nuker for both slash and heat damage. For slash, there's competition, especially with Kihachi. If you already have her, he won't be adding much. But for heat damage, Apollo is the best one, and there's no competition there. Everyone is weaker. Apollo stays safe as a damage dealer for the time being, and will keep being useful. If you decide to skip him, it's okay, because damage dealers are easy to replace, unlike support units like Darius. But I have to say that this guy deserves a 4.5 out of 5 in my new grading system. The next character is Candy, and we have 100% endurance and 100% will, so the character is a little tanky. 103% STR is not that high, but 120% agility. Kenji is not a damage dealer, but he can use attack skills, and all the other status won't matter as much. Moving on for passives, the first one, Fiesta Prep. On start of battle, it will grant all surviving allies, including himself, Prep Stance. Prep Stance will then check if your Overdrive Gauge is not full on the start of a turn. If it's not full, you will recover 1 BP, and by the end of a turn, you're going to get 25 points of OG Gauge. That's very great, and it's even higher than Darius. Darius gives only 15 points, and that is for just that turn. If you are on Overdrive, you will not get anything, but that's great. Then, on the start of a turn, he will always recover 2 BP to himself, so at least 6 when not on Overdrive, and then grants all surviving allies over Enhance. That increases Overdrive damage by 20%, can trigger 3 times per battle. Comparing to Darius again, Darius increases overdrive damage by 50%, but on turn 1, while Candy increases by 60%, but takes 3 times to do so. Kinda similar, but not the same. Then after activating overdrive attack, Friend's Balloon Big March will be activated using skill rank 1. What is that? Skill number 3. It is an AoE attack with C power. Well, damage is barely non-existent, but then it will give a defense boost of medium effect, decreasing damage taken by 25%, lasts for 2 turns, can stack with other sources of defense boost, and will grant this passive to everyone, where you will recover 1 BP if you are attacked by a skill. This can trigger 3 times and the effect lasts for 2 turns. This is exclusive to global, and having it for 2 turns is great. This is similar to Asper, Gal, latest style. She has this skill called Psychic Hunt, where it has a defense boost as well, medium effect, but in her case it only lasts for 1 turn. One lasts for 2 turns, and she gets this recover plus 1 BP to the party that can trigger 3 times, but only 1 turn. So you can see that it costs less, just 6. And in the case of Candy, it's different because it's a skill, but it's a better one, although 6 BP versus 9 is a big difference as well. But in the current challenge, Arsenal has only skill attacks, so in that case you have a guaranteed BP generation. Candy will be generating more BP than even or biggest Shirei. Yes, even more generation than Shirei. Will also be giving you more defense boosts than Shirei that only gives 15%. The only difference is that Shirei can use different stuff like debuff cleans, heal a little, buff, but Candy is more useful if the enemy uses just skills. Okay, but then you have to consider that it's a 9 BP skill, and you usually get 6 when not on overdrive, and also 5 when on overdrive. But as soon as you use this skill and you get extra because of the effect, sometimes you can even use this every turn. And if you use it as a command and get it again as overdrive, you have 2 defense boosts that last for 2 turns. And lots of BP generation. So that's actually pretty great if you can keep using it. Then, on the start of a turn, he grants 1 damage block for himself 1 time on turn, meaning that 1 hit will not do damage, and he has a high chance, 37%, to grant all surviving allies nullified damage to direct attacks for 1 turn. That's actually pretty nice. It's bad, it's unreliable, but something like that would never be a guarantee. So direct damage will be nullified, and if you are using Candy versus enemies that uses the skills, there's a good chance that they will have direct attacks as well. In the case of Arsenal, the current challenge, it doesn't happen, but many other fights, enemies will have direct attacks. So an extra can help you, but you should not consider this to survive. Then we have when attack damage will be reduced by 30%, and when attacked by skills, it will be reduced by another 40%. So if Candy is being used on the right situation, with the right units, it's not going to take much damage, and he's going to buff your defenses while generating a lot of BP. Well, first skill is a 1 BP cost C power attack that has morality down small, that will decrease damage taken by the source by 15%. So that's pretty cool because it's almost cheap. And then the second one, Pretty Runner, it's a support fast skill that will give you a defense boost, decreasing damage taken by 15%, lasts for 2 turns, can stack, and also this defensive stance 2 skill that will decrease the skill damage by 15%, lasts for 2 turns. You should not use this in the next turn, because the defensive stance skill is not stackable, if I'm not mistaken. If you are in a fight where you don't want to use skill number 3, for some reason, maybe the enemy is not using skills, mostly spells. But the best skill is the skill 3. Friend's Balloon Big March. That will give you the defense boost, the BP generation, and because of the 25 points of OD Gouge by the end of turn because of the passive, you will get into overdrive every 2 turns with Candy. So turn 3, you are on overdrive, turn 6, always. That means that you get an extra free defense boost that lasts for 2 turns, not exactly for 3. He has this. The skill is also not fast, it means that it doesn't guarantee that it will be used before the enemy, but look on Candy agility, 120%. It will hardly, if ever, be used right after the enemy, unless the enemy has some fast stance or action order increase or some very high status. Little bit of a problem that if his defense boost lasted for 3 turns, he would have been perfect, because he'll never have downtime. But they did this so that you still have to trigger the PP generation to keep using the skill and keep stacking more defense boosts. He's not the best defense booster by any case, he's a hybrid, where he can offer you a lot of defenses, but also a lot of VP generation. It's for those moments where you probably have another character being your main defense booster, with Candy being your secondary one doing something else, and in this case, it's to generate VP. So good partners for Candy, okay, will be Liz, the best partner in my opinion, because then you have lots of defense boosts. This also gives extra BP, so Candy will have even better BP generation to use skill number 3 more often. But not just Liz. For example, I believe he works super well with Gathered, because Gathered also gives lots of defense boosts, and well, sometimes just the two together will be enough. He still works pretty well with Enya, but it depends on the fight. I think that if you can replace Enya with Candy, you will probably do so. But there's also another one that has been released recently, that is Sirius, and Sirius also works well with Candy. The good thing about Candy is that he uses stuff that is stackable. Nothing here is exclusive, like Morale up or Guard up. The only thing that is not stackable is the Morale down small. That's not even his main gimmick. He wants to keep using skill 3. I would say that you should probably forget about skill 2 unless you are using Candy on fights where the enemy don't use skills. But if they don't use skill, you are not using skill number 2 anyway, because this one increases skill defense. So anyway, better to keep the defense boost and the morale down small if possible. As for inheritance, there's nothing that really shines here, because this Candy only has 51% intelligence, so any of the debuffs will not work well. But there is Punishing Rush Plus, a skill that will recover between 2 to 8 BP, but costs 3. So you can actually recover at least 2, so that you paid only 1 BP, but you have a chance of getting, for example, 5 extra BP by using it. You can also use Wind Whistle Plus for when you want to fight Vampire Lady, since it removes all enemy buffs. But anything else is not really that important, because it's either debuffs or stuff that you can find in other characters, like Stun. Some could say you could use Ice Cream Break to heal a little and give augmented resistance, but this is small, it's not really game changing, and there are better characters for augmented resistance. Nothing else really matters. And one last comparison that should be made is Candy versus Darius. Which one is the better one? Well, there is no real answer. Depends on the fight. Darius is usually better. You don't need extra EP generation, because he has 3 turns of defense boost, and he has a lot of HP recover. He still gives OD points, although 15, and he still increases your overdrive gauge. Because of the better healing, it may be easier to replace Liz with Darius, while Candy may still prefer to run Liz in the same squad. But if you can get lots of VP generation, you are removing the need of Shirei in your party, and you are using Candy. So it depends on the fight. You will want to use one or the other. I still have to say that Darius is more universally used, because he does not depend on the enemy using a certain type of skill in order to trigger VP generation. But if Candy is on full potential, he is really good. Because of that, I believe Candy also deserves a 4.5 out of 5 as a very useful unit. You just need to pick his fights a little more wisely than Darius. The last character is Hiveris, and he is a counter tank, as you can see, very high endurance and will. And then we have just 105% dexterity and just 106% intelligence and very low agility. That doesn't really affect unless you are using a spell. This guy can miss spells on the more recent Remembrance fights. Now, he reduces damage taken for all allies by 25%. That's pretty big, especially for guns, because on guns we don't have that many supports, and decreasing 25% is awesome. And I have to say right now that if you have his other premium style, you can even increase that by use of Zero Absolute, that will give hit down to the enemy, decreasing damage by 5% on the source, and then increasing your defenses by another 15% damage reduction, so that you have 25% at all times, 15% as well, and then -5 on source. Lots of damage reduction for guns, and it is very useful for a future fight on the next Remembrance phase when you fight the Dragon Megalith. Then he starts the fight with 12 BP, and when being directly attacked, counter with Water Hammer Plus. That is a single target cold and blunt attack that debuffs STR and intelligence by 10%. Well, this is exactly the same thing that Summer Orlette does, but in her case it's Flame Hammer. Flame Hammer is just a different element, but he debuffs the same things. And she also taunts. That's something that Hiveris also does. That's very useful for a counter tank. As you can see, he enters a taunt stance of medium effect, lasts for 4 turns and will stack. On start of a turn, he also gets Endurance and Will buff by 20%. Will also recover HP and increase his own ailment resistances. That's pretty nice. You can even use Hiveris for Wuhan without landing Confusion or Charm, because he gets so much, he eventually can block being instant killed. Now, when he is attacked, he also gets 1 BP. That's useful because he can keep using his best skills if he's hit too often, aligning with the taunt. That's the same thing that Julian does. He taunts and gets BP when attacked. Now, if he is hit by an attack that has slash damage, he will reduce all enemies' STR by 15%. Well, that's pretty specific, being attacked by slash damage. Okay, it is specific, but slash is not that uncommon in Remembrance fights. Like, Wyvern does slash, Carmine does slash, Wuhan does slash, Kazinsi does slash, and so on. And then, decreasing the enemy STR by 15% is nice, especially on Carmine, because it will land on all enemies. Then when you are hit by an attack that has blunt, it will reduce all enemies' agility. Many of the enemies will have blunt attacks, especially the Real Queen. The Wyvern as well. Even Princess Lion. And you will be debuffing agility by 15%. Agility will decrease MR's damage, but it's not as important as STR most of the time. And if you are hit by a cold attack, then you decrease the enemy's intelligence by 15%. Oh, Kazinsi has cold attacks. There is also Siegfried that will also use cold attacks. It works here and there. It's not something that you should be relying, but on Remembrance, it can give you some value. Also, when attack damage will be reduced at all times by 50%, alongside the 25 from the party. Well, Hiveris will not take much damage. Moving on, skill number 1 is a gun, Cold Bullet, 2 BP for blunt and cold damage, and has a chance to debuff the enemy agility by 20%. For the cost, the debuff value is pretty nice, but dexterity is not that high, so I don't know if you will be landing this. Remember that he buffs Endurance and Will only. Those are defensive status. The second one, Water Hammer, well, he does have 106% intelligence, and this is the same skill that he counters. Cold and Blunt, A power. When used as a skill, it will debuff 15%. When used as a counter, it debuffs only 10%. And because it's STR and intelligence, it's a pretty good combination to decrease the enemy damage potential. And it's probably the skill that you'll be using more often, to be honest. That is, if you can debuff the enemy. Well, for guns, we don't have many buffers, so it will be hard to land if the enemy has very high will. Then, Takizaki Crab Combo Shot is another spell, and single target, cold and blunt again, grants the user a damage block for 1 time, no turn limit. So you could keep stacking this if the enemy does not break your damage block. You recover the HP by around 2000, and it has triple S power, but the cost is 12, and this is something that you will be using if you have a lot of extra BP generation from being attacked. You could also use this on turn 1, but why would you do so, since you'll be recovering something that you didn't lost? So, when you have enough VP, you can use this skill, but I believe Water Hammer Plus will be more useful most of the time. And there's no much inheritances to talk about. Zero Absolute, like I said, is the best one. And nothing else here is good, since Ice Flower Dance is STR based, and look on his STR, it's terrible. And Ice Pillars just gives guard up medium for 5 turns, and this defense boost is for 1 turn only, it would not stack. You could get Higher Will via Ice Meteor Swarm to maybe protect Hiveris versus Wuhan if you don't have Confusion or Charm, and that can work, but nothing else really matters for this guy. I don't like this skill setup, I wish he had something better. He will work versus the Megalith Dragon in the future because he can stop the enemy. He's not the only counter that can do so. We have Socho that can counter, but Socho defenses are much lower. because he only has this R1 defense 6, decreasing damage by 40%. And Toji. Toji is really not really great. And he also has Taunt with 1 damage block. I believe that the best option is Hiveris, but the other ones may work if you have other types of support. If you are someone like me that barely has support, and you have the premium Zero Absolute, then Hiveris will be on full potential. Not to say that you're gonna use this guy on real challenges. Lock it into Remembrance and even for future. But, well, you can use him if the enemy uses too many direct attacks and you want to counter via Waterhammer Plus. But Summer Orletta is much better because she has extra debuffs that can apply on the start of the turn of the enemy. You know, that said, Hiveris is much of a very dedicated specialist for something that is not even here yet. So I believe he only deserves a 3 out of 5 grade in my new grading system. It's the easiest one to skip. Now, back to the banner image. Is this banner worth summoning for? I would say that yes. You should think about which type of character you want, since both banners have good values. But on Darius' banner, the only one that really matters is Darius. In this banner we have Apollo, a very strong damage dealer that, if you don't have Kihachi, will serve you well for 2 different elements. If you already have Kihachi, he will be mostly for heat. But if you prefer to use a formation like Mystic Line, for example, he prefers Intelligence. Kihachi is STR basic. You can still use them pretty well. And Candy is a defense booster and BP generator that works super well, with Hiveris being an extra utility character for the future. I believe that this banner deserves a Silver Plus award by having 2 meta strong units, with Hiveris being a plus. It gives more value than chasing just one very big unit, even though Darius is still better in my opinion. With all that said, this is my opinion. What is yours? Please say here in the comment section. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't. If you want to support the channel, use the links in the description. I hope to see you soon in the next one. Goodbye.